2 years after my father's death, my mother unexpectedly remarried a man only a few years older than me, and I was forced to call him my stepfather, Samuel. From the moment he appeared, my mother grew distant, captivated by his honeyed words. The most bitter pill was that she handed over her inheritance rights to him. Samuel promptly sold the house where my wife and children were living, casting us out like strangers. But he had no idea I was preparing a counterattack, and that Thanksgiving dinner would become the greatest nightmare of his life. My name is Ernest Becker, 35 years old, a writer living off the pages of my books and dreams that never fully took shape. I grew up in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, where golden sunlight filtered through oak trees and clean stone-paved streets. That was my father's house, a man I both admired and felt distant from. My father, William Becker, was a successful entrepreneur, the founder of a chain of car dealerships renowned across the region. He built his empire from nothing with sweat and iron will. To everyone else, he was the ideal man, polished, reputable, and commanding respect. But to me, he was a faint shadow, a father often absent due to endless business trips, meetings, and handshakes with big-shot partners. I remember evenings at the dinner table, just me, my sister, and my mother, the dim yellow light casting shadows on cold, untouched food while my father was still not home. My mother, Margaret, was a kind woman, her eyes always radiating gentleness but tinged with sadness. She loved my father, I knew that, but her love was often met with expensive gifts and rushed promises. "I'll be home soon," he'd say, but soon could mean days or even weeks. My mother never complained, but I saw her sitting by the window, hands clasped tightly, staring down the driveway, waiting for a figure that never appeared. As I grew up, married Anna, and started a family with 2 young children, my mother seemed to grow even lonelier. I had moved out of the mansion to live with my little family, but we stayed in another house my father owned, a gift he gave me when I got married. My mother remained in the big mansion, alone with empty rooms and old memories. My younger sister Betty was the only other family member left. 7 years my junior, she was intelligent, strong, but deeply emotional. Betty left Phoenix at 18 to study in England, where she later married and settled. She rarely came back, but her voice over the phone was always warm, filled with stories of her new life and questions about our mother. "Take care of Mom, okay?" she'd say. And I'd nod, though I knew I could never fill the void my father left. Then everything changed. My father died. A sudden heart attack without warning took him in his office. I remember that day, the Phoenix sky heavy and gray, as if the world knew the pain coming. I got a call from his secretary, her voice trembling. "Ernest, come to the hospital now. The boss. I didn't let her finish, rushing out, heart pounding. But when I arrived, it was too late. My father lay there on the hospital bed, his face serene as if asleep, but his eyes, they would never open again. His death wasn't just an emotional loss. He left no will, and by law, his entire estate, company shares, real estate, stocks, passed to my mother. It was a colossal fortune, enough to overwhelm anyone. But to my mother, it seemed meaningless. She didn't care about money or power. What she wanted was my father's presence, the moments she'd waited for all those years but never received. I watched my mother withdraw, becoming quieter, like a shadow wandering the vast mansion. She'd sit in the living room, clutching their wedding photo, her eyes lost. I wanted to be there for her more, but my life, writing, caring for Anna and the kids, kept me tied up. I grew worried. My mother had never managed finances, never dealt with complex numbers or big decisions. My father had always handled everything, and now, with him gone, I felt a heavy responsibility settle on my shoulders. I hadn't just lost a father. I had to become my mother's emotional anchor, a role I wasn't prepared for. I tried to be closer to her, but every visit found her sitting silently, as if waiting for something that would never come. "I'm fine, Ernest," she'd say, but her smile couldn't hide the emptiness in her eyes. 2 years passed, and I thought life would slowly stabilize, that my mother would find a way to move past her grief. I was wrong. One afternoon, while I was in my study editing a manuscript for my new novel, my mother called. Her voice was soft but carried an unusual hint of excitement, something I hadn't heard since my father's death. "Ernest, come to the house for dinner tonight. I have something important to tell you." I arrived at the mansion, curiosity piqued. My mother greeted me at the door, wearing a pale blue dress, her hair neatly pinned, looking younger than usual. She led me to the dining room, where the table was set with my childhood favorites: mashed potatoes, roast beef, and fragrant apple pie. But what stopped me in my tracks was the man sitting at the head of the table, smiling as if we'd known each other forever. "Ernest, this is Samuel," my mother introduced, her voice brimming with pride. Samuel and I are getting married." I stood frozen, my mind reeling. Samuel, a man only a few years older than me, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, and a smile so confident it bordered on arrogance. He stood, shaking my hand, his grip soft yet deliberately firm. "Great to meet you, Ernest," he said, his voice smooth like a seasoned salesman. "Your mother's told me so much about you." I forced a strained smile, but inside unease stirred. My mother looked at Samuel with eyes I hadn't seen since my father was alive, eyes full of love and hope. But to me, Samuel wasn't hope. He was a giant question mark, a threat I couldn't yet define. That night I returned home, my mind still in turmoil. The house I shared with Anna and our 2 children, Lily and Max, was part of my father's legacy. It wasn't just a house. It was a repository of memories, where I used to sit with my father as he recounted his early days of building his business, armed with nothing but an old car and big dreams. Now, with my mother's announcement of her remarriage, I couldn't help but wonder if Samuel truly wanted to bring her happiness, or if he was after something bigger, like my father's legacy itself. Samuel entered our lives like a strange gust of wind, bringing changes I couldn't keep up with. He was about 38, tall, with sleek black hair combed back and a smile that never left his face, a smile I couldn't quite decipher. He introduced himself as a successful real estate broker, always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, a flashy watch gleaming on his wrist, and a smooth-talking manner that seemed rehearsed 100 times in front of a mirror. "I just want to make Margaret happy," he told me during our second meeting, his hand resting possessively on my mother's shoulder. She smiled, nodding, as if his every word was gospel. But to me, he was a man performing a role too perfectly. My mother and Samuel's wedding took place just 3 months after that first meeting. It wasn't an extravagant affair, but intimate enough to convince everyone it was a fresh start. My mother wore a simple white dress, her silver-streaked hair framing a face radiant with youthful joy. Samuel stood beside her, holding her hand, exchanging vows in a warm, emotional tone. I sat in the front row next to Anna, trying to clap, trying to smile, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a performance. Lily, my eldest, whispered, "Grandma looks so happy, doesn't she, Daddy?" I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Samuel. He looked at my mother with apparent affection. But when our gazes met, his smile faltered for a moment, just long enough for me to catch a glint of coldness in his eyes. After the wedding, Samuel quickly inserted himself into the family, or rather, he began to control it. He moved into my mother's mansion, the home that had once been my father's sanctuary. He started appearing in every conversation, every decision. "Margaret, we should redecorate the living room. It's looking a bit dated," he'd say, and my mother would nod as if his opinion was what she'd been waiting for. "We should invest more in real estate. I know some great opportunities," he'd continue, and she'd agree without a hint of doubt. I tried talking to her, reminding her that my father had built everything with sweat and tears, that she needed to be careful with the estate. But every time I spoke up, she looked at me with sad eyes, as if I were trying to steal her happiness. "Ernest, can't you see I'm happy?" she'd ask, her voice soft but enough to silence me. I began to notice my mother changing. She stopped calling to check on me or the kids like she used to. The weekend dinners where she'd lovingly prepare my favorite dishes became a thing of the past. Instead, she was busy with Samuel's plans, vacations, parties with his new friends, projects he called golden opportunities. I felt her slipping away as if Samuel had built an invisible wall between us. Then one day, my worst fears began to surface. I visited my mother, bringing some cookies Anna had made, hoping to reconnect like old times. But when I stepped inside, I saw Samuel at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up, smiling. "Ernest, perfect timing. We're discussing selling some shares in your father's company." I froze, turning to my mother. She sat there, hands clasped, nodding slightly. "Samuel says it's the best way to help his family. His sister is very ill and his mother is struggling. I think it's the right thing to do." My blood boiled. "Mom, that's Dad's company. He spent his life building it." I tried to keep my voice calm, but anger made me tremble. Samuel cut in, his tone as smooth as ever. "Ernest, I understand how you feel, but this is Margaret's estate, and she has the right to decide. I'm just helping her manage it better." He looked at me, his eyes challenging. I wanted to scream, to say I didn't believe a word he said, but my mother took my hand, her voice pleading. "Ernest, please don't make things complicated. Samuel is a good man." I left my mother's house that night, my heart heavy. In the weeks that followed, I started paying closer attention to Samuel. I realized he wasn't just infiltrating my mother's life, he was worming his way into every corner of the family. He began offering opinions on how my mother spent money, on the properties my father left behind, even on the house I lived in. "Ernest, that house you're in has great potential if sold," he said once during a visit. "You should consider investing in something more profitable." I stared at him, struggling to stay calm, but inside a storm was brewing. He didn't just want to control my mother. He wanted everything. My unease grew. I started documenting Samuel's words and actions as if it would keep me grounded. I called my father's old lawyer, Henry, to ask about the inheritance. He confirmed that my mother had full control over the estate, but warned me, "Ernest, keep an eye on this man. I've seen cases like this before. Sometimes love is just a trap." His words sent a chill down my spine. I went home, hugged Anna, and poured out everything. "I can't let him take everything from Mom," I said, my voice shaking with anger and helplessness. Anna took my hand, her eyes resolute. "Then you have to do something, Ernest. But be careful. Samuel isn't a simple man." I nodded, knowing she was right. But in my heart, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't let Samuel steal my father's legacy, and more importantly, I wouldn't let him take my mother from me. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of nameless tension. Each morning as I woke, I felt a heavy stone pressing down on my chest. Samuel had not only wormed his way into my mother's life, but had begun reaching for things I once thought untouchable. The house we lived in, where Lily and Max grew up, where I wrote my first pages, where my father used to sit with me sharing his dreams, was now in his crosshairs. Samuel's words about selling the house to invest echoed in my mind, a chilling warning. But I never imagined things would go this far until the real shock hit. That afternoon, the Phoenix sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low as if ready to unleash a storm. I had just finished a new chapter of my book and was making ascending brewing coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Anna went to answer it, and I heard Samuel's smooth, infuriatingly familiar voice. "Is Ernest home?" he asked, his tone as sweet as if he were visiting an old friend. I stepped out, trying to stay calm, but his gaze sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a middle-aged man in a black suit holding a briefcase, and a stern-looking woman with thin-framed glasses, clearly a notary. "Ernest, we need to talk," Samuel said, his smile still plastered on his face, but his eyes cold as a blade. He placed a stack of papers on the dining table and slid them toward me. "These are the transfer documents for this house. Margaret has agreed to transfer it to my name for a real estate investment. The market's strong right now, you know. He paused, watching my reaction. And I've already found a buyer. They'll come to view the house next week. You and your family should start packing. I stood frozen, as if someone had just slapped me across the face. Transfer? My mother agreed to this? My voice cracked, unable to believe what I'd heard. Samuel nodded, pulling from his briefcase a document bearing my mother's signature. The notary's red seal glaring like a knife wound in my heart. Margaret wants what's best for the family, he said, his tone flat. She trusts me. You should too. I looked at Anna, seeing the panic in her eyes. Lily and Max were playing in the living room, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. This is our home, I said, my voice trembling with anger. My father left this house to me, to my family. My mother can't do this without telling me. Samuel shrugged, his expression still maddeningly calm. Margaret has full authority over the property, Ernest. And she's made her decision. You don't want to make this difficult for her, do you? He stepped closer, lowering his voice, each word piercing my chest like a needle. Cooperate, Ernest. It'll be better for everyone. I wanted to lunge at him, to scream that he was a fraud, a bastard exploiting my mother. But the man in the suit, clearly Samuel's lawyer, interjected. Mr. Becker, I advise you to review the documents. Everything is legal. If you don't move out, we'll have to proceed with eviction. The word eviction hit like thunder, leaving me stunned. Eviction? From the very house my father left me, where I built a life with Anna and our children? That night I couldn't sleep. Anna sat beside me, trying to comfort me, but we both knew the situation had turned dire. What are we going to do, Ernest? She asked, her voice choked. I took her hand, trying to keep my voice steady despite the devastation inside. I'll talk to Mom. Something's not right. She can't do this to us. The next day I drove to my mother's mansion, my heart heavy as if carrying the weight of the world. She was in the garden, watering the rose bushes she and my father once tended. Seeing her, I glimpsed the gentle woman of years past, but now she seemed to belong to a different world. Samuel's world. Mom, we need to talk, I said, keeping my voice soft. About the house. Samuel says you transferred it to him, is that true? She stopped watering, turning to face me. Her eyes flickered with unease, but then she gave a weak smile. Ernest, I trust Samuel. He says selling the house will give us money to invest. You're grown. You have your own life. I thought you'd understand. Her words cut like a knife, slicing deep into my heart. Understand? I echoed, my voice trembling. You're talking about kicking me and my family out of our home. Do you realize how serious this is? She looked at me, her gaze hardening. Ernest, don't speak as if I'm the villain. Samuel is helping me manage the estate. He knows how to do things I can't. I wanted to scream, to ask why she trusted a stranger over her own son, but I held back. I knew arguing further would only push her deeper into Samuel's grasp. The days that followed were a nightmare. Samuel wasn't bluffing. He began bringing potential buyers to view the house, strangers walking through our living room, eyeing the walls where I hung family photos, where Lily had scribbled colorful drawings. Each time they came, Samuel demanded we tidy up to make the house more appealing. Anna had to take the kids out to shield them from prying eyes while I stood there powerless, watching our home become a commodity. I tried talking to my mother a few more times, but Samuel was always there, interjecting with his slick words, convincing her everything he did was for her benefit. Ernest, you should focus on your writing career, he said once, his tone dripping with mockery. Leave the big decisions to me and Margaret. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to let my anger explode, but deep down I knew I couldn't let this continue. Then the worst day came. A rainy afternoon, the Phoenix sky dark as if ready to drown everything. The doorbell rang, and there stood Samuel, soaked but still exuding that infuriating confidence. Beside him were the lawyer and notary from before, along with another document. an official eviction notice. "Ernest, time's up," Samuel said, his voice cold as ice. "You and your family need to leave today. The buyer has signed the contract. I don't want to make this harder, but you've left me no choice." I stared at him, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. "Today? You're joking, right? This is my home," I shouted, no longer able to hold back. Anna stood behind me, clutching Lily and Max, both children staring fearfully at the stranger, threatening their family. Samuel shrugged, gesturing to the lawyer. "We've followed procedure, Mr. Becker," the lawyer said, his voice mechanical. "If you don't leave, we'll have to call the police." The rain poured, roaring on the roof like it echoed the fury inside me. But I knew I had no choice. I couldn't let the kids see their father dragged away in handcuffs. Anna and I began packing, gathering small items that held an entire life. Family photo frames, the books I wrote, Lily and Max's toys. Each item I touched was a reminder of what I was losing. Samuel stood at the door, arms crossed, watching us with indifferent eyes. "Hurry up, Ernest," he said. "In this rain, I don't want to stay here long either." That night, under the freezing rain, Anna and I took the kids to a small motel on the outskirts. Lily cried, asking why we had to leave home. Max, only 5, sensed the wrongness, clutching the teddy bear my father once gave him. Anna tried to stay strong, but I saw her eyes red and swollen. I held her, whispering, "I won't let this end like this. I promise." The next day, I returned to my mother's mansion, determined to confront her again. She was in the living room holding a framed photo of her and my father's wedding. When she saw me, she stood, but her eyes lacked their former warmth. "Mom, why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you let Samuel kick me and your grandchildren out of our home?" Samuel emerged from another room, cutting me off. "Ernest, don't bother your mother. You're a grown man. Stop running to mommy like a child. It's time to fend for yourself." He smirked, a mocking grin that made me want to punch him. But what hurt most was my mother. She looked at me, then at Samuel, her eyes full of trust. "Ernest, I think you should stand on your own." "Samuel's right. You need to learn to provide for your family." Her words were the final knife, shattering what little hope I had left. I left the mansion without another word, but inside a fire ignited. Samuel might have taken my home, but he wouldn't take my resolve. I'd find a way to expose him, no matter the cost. The days that followed felt like living in an inescapable nightmare. The small motel room, with its musty carpet smell and the constant hum of the air conditioner, became our family's temporary refuge. Anna tried to stay upbeat for Lily and Max, turning simple dinners into cheerful storytelling sessions, but I could see her eyes, the worry she couldn't hide. Lily, our sensitive 8-year-old, kept asking, "Dad, when can we go home?" Max, only 5, didn't ask much, but he clung tightly to the teddy bear my father had given him, as if it were the last link to our peaceful days. I sat in the darkness of the motel room, staring out the window where dim streetlights illuminated the puddles left by the rain. Every night, the image of my mother standing beside Samuel, her eyes full of trust in him, haunted me. I couldn't fathom how she could have changed so much, how she could choose a stranger over her own son. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized blaming her wouldn't solve anything. Samuel was the problem. He had manipulated her, exploited her loneliness, and now he was destroying my family. I couldn't let him continue. But I knew I couldn't act impulsively. Samuel wasn't an amateur. He was cunning, calculated, and seemed prepared for every scenario. If I wanted to expose him, I needed evidence, irrefutable proof. And to get that, I needed to investigate. That decision led me to a turning point. I called my sister Betty, who lived in England. It had been a while since we'd spoken. I hadn't wanted to disrupt her busy life in London, but now I had no other choice. When Betty's voice came through the phone, warm but tinged with concern, I felt a spark of renewed strength. "Ernest, are you okay? Why do you sound so tense?" she asked. I poured out everything, from our mother's remarriage to Samuel, how he convinced her to sell company shares, to the shock of him evicting my family from our home. Betty was silent for a moment, then sighed. My God, Ernest, why didn't you tell me sooner? Mom remarried and I had no idea. Her tone carried a hint of reproach, but I knew it stemmed from worry. I didn't want to bother you, I replied, my voice low. But now I need help. Samuel, I don't trust him. I think he's a con artist, and I need to find a way to prove it. Betty didn't hesitate. You're right. Someone like Samuel doesn't just show up to love Mom. He has an agenda. You need to dig into his past, Ernest. Find out who he is, what he's done, and why he's targeting her. Her words were like a light in the darkness, confirming the suspicions I'd carried for so long. But you have to be careful, she continued. If he's a fraud, he won't let you expose him easily. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I know. Thanks, Betty. After the call, I felt a surge of new energy. I was no longer the helpless man watching his family be torn apart. I would fight, and I'd start by uncovering Samuel's past. But investigating someone like Samuel was no simple task. I wasn't a detective, just a writer with a few best-selling books and a family to protect. I began with the smallest details. I sifted through old documents my father had left behind, hoping to find clues about the property transfer. I checked Samuel's social media, a polished Instagram account filled with photos of him posing in front of luxurious villas, expensive cars, and lavish vacations. Everything was too perfect, like a carefully crafted illusion. But I knew there had to be cracks in that facade. I spent hours scrolling through his posts, noting every detail, places he'd been, people he'd photographed with, vague comments from unfamiliar accounts. One photo made me pause. Samuel standing next to an older, wealthy-looking woman at an event from 3 years ago. The woman's smile and the way she looked at him mirrored how my mother gazed at him. I saved the photo, feeling like I'd found the first piece of the puzzle. Next, I contacted Mr. Henry, my father's old lawyer. He was a stern man with silver hair and thick-rimmed glasses who had helped my father build his business empire from the ground up. When I visited his office bringing the documents related to the house, he looked at me with concern. Ernest, I've had my suspicions about Samuel since you first mentioned him, he said, his voice low. I don't have concrete evidence, but I've seen cases like this. Men like Samuel often target lonely, wealthy older women. They're easy to manipulate. I told him about the house transfer and how Samuel had evicted my family. He shook his head, flipping through the papers. Everything is legally sound, Ernest, but that doesn't mean it's right. If you want to fight him, you need proof. Proof that he's deceiving or manipulating Margaret, and you need to act fast before he sells everything. Mr. Henry's words fueled the fire within me. I dug deeper, reaching out to an old friend, Tom, who worked in journalism and had experience investigating shady dealings. I sent Tom everything I knew about Samuel, his name, age, profession, and any details I had. I need you to dig into this guy's past, I said. Tom agreed but warned, if he's a professional con artist, he'll cover his tracks well. But I'll try. While waiting for Tom, I continued my own investigation. I visited the real estate office where Samuel had once worked, posing as a potential client to ask about him. The manager, a middle-aged woman with a professional smile, said Samuel had left over a year ago. He was great at communicating, but, how do I put it, something felt off. He often worked with older clients, especially women. I don't know details, but there were rumors about some shady deals. Her words made my heart race. I was on the right track. After a few weeks, Tom called back. Ernest, I found some things, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. Samuel, full name Samuel Grayson, has a long history. He's been married twice, both times to older, wealthy women. After the divorces, those women lost most of their assets. There was a lawsuit 5 years ago, but it was dropped for lack of evidence. The police have had their eye on him, but no one's come forward to press charges. I sat down, my hands trembling as I absorbed his words. Samuel wasn't just a fraud, he was a predator, and my mother was his next prey. "Anything else?" I asked. Tom sighed. "I found the name of a woman connected to him, Evelyn Carter. She lives in Tucson, not far from here. She might know something, but Ernest, be careful. If he realizes you're investigating, things could get worse." I wrote down Evelyn's address, filled with determination. I knew I was stepping onto a dangerous path, but there was no turning back. Samuel had taken my home and manipulated my mother, and now I would make him pay. I prepared for the trip to Tucson, bringing a notebook and a heart full of anger. Anna hugged me before I left, whispering, "Be careful, Ernest. You're everything to us." I nodded, kissed her forehead and the kids, and promised to bring justice. One thought consumed me. Samuel wouldn't get away, not this time. The drive from Phoenix to Tucson, over 100 miles, felt like it stretched across a lifetime. The Arizona sky was overcast, with clouds drifting slowly as if mirroring my mood. I drove in silence, accompanied only by the steady hum of the engine and the chaotic thoughts swirling in my head. The notebook on the passenger seat was filled with scattered clues about Samuel, his real name, the dropped lawsuits, the rumors of shady deals. But I knew that to defeat someone like Samuel, I needed more than that. I needed concrete evidence, witnesses willing to speak out, and above all, I needed to ensure my mother wouldn't be hurt any further. When I arrived in Tucson, I found the address Tom had given me, a modest house on the outskirts with a faded white wooden fence and a carefully tended small garden. This was the home of Evelyn Carter, the woman Tom believed had been a victim of Samuel. I stood at the door, taking a deep breath to quell the tension rising in my chest. When I knocked, a woman in her 60s answered, her sharp eyes filled with wariness. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling, as if she was accustomed to being cautious. "I'm Ernest Becker," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm here about Samuel Grayson. I think you might know something about him." At the mention of his name, Evelyn's face stiffened, her eyes darkening. She was silent for a moment before opening the door wider. "Come in," she said, her voice low. "But I warn you, this won't be pleasant." Evelyn led me into her living room, a simple space with an old sofa and a few family photos on a shelf. She poured tea, her hands trembling slightly as she set the cups on the table. "How do you know about Samuel?" she asked, her gaze probing. I told her everything, about my mother, how Samuel manipulated her, how he took our family's home. When I mentioned the property transfer, Evelyn sighed, as if seeing her own story replayed. "I met Samuel 6 years ago," she began, her voice slow and heavy. "I had just lost my husband and was drowning in loneliness. Samuel appeared like a savior, charming, gallant, always knowing how to make me laugh. He said he loved me, said he wanted to build a future together. But then he convinced me to sell the house my husband left me, claiming it was the way to secure my finances. I trusted him. I signed the papers, transferred money into a joint account, and then..." She paused, her eyes welling up. "He disappeared. I lost my home, nearly all my savings, and was left with nothing but shame." I listened, my heart tightening. Her story was eerily similar to what was happening to my mother. "Did you report him to the police?" I asked. Evelyn shook her head. "I had no proof. Samuel was careful. Everything was legally airtight, and I was too ashamed to tell anyone. I just wanted to forget it all." She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain. "But if you're trying to stop him, I'll help. I don't want anyone else to suffer like I did." Her words were a glimmer of hope. I asked if she still had any documents or anything related to Samuel. She nodded, stood, and retrieved an old box of files from a drawer. Inside were copies of transfer contracts, bank statements, and a few emails Samuel had sent her. "I kept them because I thought one day I might need them to seek justice," she said, her voice breaking. I thanked her, promised to stay in touch, and left her house with a mix of heaviness and determination. I had found a witness, but I knew I needed more. Back in Phoenix, I contacted Mr. Henry, my father's lawyer, again. I showed him the documents from Evelyn and recounted her story. He flipped through the pages, his eyes sharp. "This is a good start, Ernest," he said. "But to bring Samuel to justice, you'll need more witnesses and evidence directly linking his actions to your mother." He suggested I search for other victims and review any financial transactions involving my mother. I dove deeper, following financial trails. I reached out to an old friend of my father's, Mr. Paul, who had worked in banking and had a wide network of contacts. After a few calls, Paul helped me access information about accounts my mother had used to transfer money to Samuel. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been moved to accounts I didn't recognize, some in Samuel's name or linked to shell companies. I photographed the statements, carefully storing them in a secure folder on my computer. Simultaneously, I continued searching for other victims. Through Tom, I learned about another woman, Linda Hayes, living in Scottsdale, not far from Phoenix. I visited her, bringing my story and Evelyn's. Linda, a woman in her 50s with a strong demeanor but wounded eyes, shared a similar tale. Samuel appeared when she was lonely after her husband's death, convinced her to invest in real estate projects, then vanished after she lost nearly all her assets. "I thought about suing," she said, "but I didn't have the strength. He's too clever, always covering his tracks." After much persuasion, both Evelyn and Linda agreed to testify if I could bring Samuel to court. They provided additional documents, contracts, text messages, and a few recordings Linda had secretly kept from conversations with Samuel. I felt like I was holding pieces of a larger puzzle, but I was still missing the final piece to complete it. I updated Betty via a video call. She sat in her London apartment, her eyes filled with worry but also determination. "You're doing great, Ernest," she said. "But you have to keep this quiet. If Samuel finds out you're investigating, he might flee or do something worse." I nodded, agreeing it wasn't time to tell our mother. I wanted her to see the truth, but I knew revealing things too soon would alert Samuel to the danger. "I'll wait for the right moment," I told Betty. "When everything's ready, I'll make sure he has no way out." Every night I sat in the motel room reviewing documents and notes. The transfer contracts, bank statements, and victims' testimonies painted a clear picture of Samuel, a professional con artist, a predator targeting vulnerable women. But I also knew that to defeat him, I needed a perfect plan. I began thinking about Thanksgiving when the family would gather. It would be the perfect opportunity to expose Samuel in front of my mother and everyone else, with all the evidence I had collected. I carefully organized everything: documents from Evelyn and Linda, bank statements, emails, and recordings. I contacted Mr. Henry again, asking him to prepare a legal team ready to act when the time came. I also called Aunt Clara, my mother's sister, who had warned her about Samuel from the start. "Ernest, I told her that man wasn't trustworthy," Clara said, her voice thick with anger. "I'm on your side. Just tell me when you need me." Her support bolstered my resolve. With every step I felt closer to justice, but also to a dangerous gamble. If my plan failed, I could lose my mother forever. But there was no turning back. Samuel had taken too much, and I would make him pay. Thanksgiving would be the day of reckoning, not just for Samuel, but for my entire family. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, I lived on edge, as taut as a bowstring. Each morning I reviewed every document, every recording, every piece of evidence I had gathered from Evelyn, Linda, and the bank statements. Everything was meticulously organized in an old leather briefcase of my father's, a reminder that I was fighting not only for my mother but also for the legacy he left behind. I contacted Mr. Henry, my father's lawyer, to ensure everything was in place. He promised that a representative from the authorities would be stationed outside my mother's mansion waiting for my signal. Aunt Clara, my mother's sister, also confirmed she would be there, ready to stand by me and help convince my mother when the time came. I knew this was a huge gamble. If my mother didn't believe me, if she chose to side with Samuel, I could lose the woman who raised me forever. But I couldn't let Samuel continue manipulating her. Couldn't let him steal what my father had spent a lifetime building. Sitting in the motel room watching Anna play with Lily and Max, I silently vowed that no matter the outcome, I would protect my family. Thanksgiving arrived, and the Phoenix sky was strangely clear, as if hiding the storm about to break. I wore a white dress shirt, trying to appear calm, but my hands trembled slightly as I gripped the briefcase. Anna held my hand before I left, her eyes filled with worry but also unwavering faith. "You can do this, Ernest," she said. "Remember that the kids and I are here, waiting for you." I kissed her, hugged Lily and Max tightly, and left the motel with a heart both heavy and resolute. When I arrived at my mother's mansion, the atmosphere was lively. The aroma of roasted turkey filled the house, mingling with the scent of wine and the sound of relatives' laughter. The dining table was elegantly set, a white tablecloth, gleaming porcelain plates, and a bouquet of red roses, my parents' favorite flower, at the center. My mother stood at the head of the table wearing a pale green dress, her face radiant as if nothing was wrong. Samuel was by her side, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, holding a glass of wine and telling a story that made a few relatives chuckle. Seeing this, I felt like an outsider in my own family. Aunt Clara arrived early, her sharp eyes meeting mine. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Are you ready, Ernest?" "This won't be easy." I nodded, forcing a strained smile. "I have to do this, Aunt Clara. For Mom and for Dad." She patted my shoulder, her gaze full of support, and I knew I wasn't alone. Dinner began in a warm, familial atmosphere, but to me it felt like a staged performance. Samuel sat at the head of the table where my father once sat, speaking confidently about his new real estate ventures. "I'm negotiating with a group of major investors," he said, his voice brimming with assurance. "With Margaret's support, we'll soon secure a prosperous future." My mother looked at him with admiration, nodding as if his every word was gospel. I gripped my fork tightly, struggling to contain the rage boiling inside me. I waited until dessert was served, pumpkin pie and hot coffee, when the atmosphere at the table had softened. This was the moment I chose to act. I stood, taking a deep breath, feeling as if the world was narrowing around me. "Everyone," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to command attention. "I have something to share. About Samuel." The table fell silent. My mother looked at me, her eyes flickering with unease. Samuel raised an eyebrow, his smile faltering. "Ernest, it's Thanksgiving," my mother said, her tone gentle but with a hint of warning. "Today is for family, not for arguments." I looked at her, my heart aching, but I knew I couldn't stop. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I can't stay silent anymore. Samuel isn't who you think he is." Samuel smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Ernest, what are you up to now? Running to Mommy like a child?" A few relatives chuckled, but I ignored them. I opened the briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents and placing them on the table. "These are the transfer agreements Samuel convinced Mom to sign," I said, my voice firm. "Our family's home, Dad's company. All of it is slipping into his hands." The air grew heavy. A few relatives began whispering, their eyes shifting toward Samuel. He maintained his composure, but I noticed his hand tightening around his wine glass. "Ernest, you're mistaken," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "I'm just helping Margaret manage her assets. Everything is transparent." "Transparent?" I echoed, my voice rising sharp and cold. I slid the bank statements toward my mother. "These are transactions you didn't know about. Hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred to accounts in Samuel's name or his shell companies. Did you know about this, Mom?" She looked at the documents, her eyes wavering, but she remained silent. I pressed on, pulling out a USB drive and plugging it into the projector I had prepared. A recording from Linda Hayes played, her voice trembling but clear. "Samuel Grayson tricked me into selling my husband's house. He said it was for our future, but then he disappeared with the money. I lost everything." The whispers in the room grew louder. My mother looked at me, then at Samuel, her eyes beginning to betray confusion. Samuel stood abruptly, his voice turning sharp. "Enough, Ernest! You're slandering me. This is all fabricated. You're jealous because Margaret trusts me more than you, aren't you?" He turned to my mother, grabbing her hand. "Margaret, you know I've done nothing wrong. Tell them." But before she could respond, Aunt Clara stood. "Margaret, you need to hear the whole truth," she said, her voice unwavering. "Ernest isn't doing this out of jealousy. He's trying to protect you." She turned to me, nodding for me to continue. I pulled out the final document, a letter from Evelyn Carter, who had agreed to testify. I read it aloud to the table. "Samuel Grayson deceived me just as he's deceiving Mrs. Margaret Becker. I lost my home, my money, and my trust. Don't let him keep hurting others." I looked at my mother, my eyes pleading. "Mom, I don't want to hurt you. But Samuel doesn't love you. He's after your wealth." My mother sat there, clutching the framed photo of her and my father's wedding, her eyes brimming with tears. Samuel's voice grew harsh. "That's enough. These are lies. I'll sue you, Ernest." But his voice was no longer smooth. It trembled, laced with panic. I knew I had hit his weak spot. At that moment, the dining room door swung open. 2 police officers stepped in, accompanied by Mr. Henry and a representative from the prosecutor's office. "Samuel Grayson," one officer said, his voice cold. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud and misappropriation of assets." The table fell silent. Samuel spun around, his eyes wild with panic, searching for an escape, but an officer swiftly grabbed his arm. "Margaret, tell them," Samuel pleaded, his voice trembling. "Tell them I'm innocent." But my mother just sat there, her gaze vacant, as if her entire world had just collapsed. The officer read Samuel his rights and escorted him out of the house as stunned relatives looked on. The sound of the handcuffs clicking, mixed with Samuel's ragged breathing, was a sound I would never forget. The dining room fell into a heavy silence, as if the air had been sucked out of it. The porcelain plates on the table, still tinged with the scent of turkey and pumpkin pie, now felt cold and lifeless. The relatives seated around the table exchanged glances between me and my mother, no one daring to speak. Aunt Clara still held my mother's hand, her shoulders trembling slightly as if trying to lend her strength. But my mother, Margaret, just sat there, clutching the framed wedding photo, her tear-filled eyes staring into the void. I wanted to step forward, to hug her, to tell her I had done all this for her, for our family. But her gaze, a mix of pain, confusion, and something akin to resentment, stopped me in my tracks. I stood there, still gripping the stack of documents, feeling as though I had won a battle but lost the war. "Mom," I called softly, my voice catching, but she didn't look at me. Slowly she stood, pushed her chair back, and walked out of the dining room, silent as a shadow. Aunt Clara gave me a sympathetic look before following her, leaving me with the curious stares of relatives and a shattered heart. I hadn't expected my mother to react this way. I had thought that once Samuel's true nature was exposed, she would be grateful, would realize I was only trying to protect her. Instead, she looked at me as if I had destroyed her happiness. I left the mansion that night, stepping out under Phoenix's starry sky. But the chill in my heart was colder than the November air. I drove back to the motel where Anna and the kids were waiting, but all I could see in my mind was my mother. Her vacant gaze, her trembling hands, and the silence that stood like a wall between us. The next day I returned to the mansion, hoping to talk to her, to explain everything. She was sitting in the living room in front of an unlit fireplace, still clutching the wedding photo like it was her last treasure. "Mom," I called gently, "we need to talk." She looked up, her eyes weary, as if she had cried all night. "Ernest," she said, her voice hoarse, "why did you do this? Why did you have to ruin everything?" Her words cut deeper than when Samuel had evicted my family from our home. "Ruin?" I repeated, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I didn't ruin anything. I'm trying to protect you. Samuel is a con artist. He's deceived you, deceived other women, stolen their assets. If I hadn't done anything, you would have lost everything, Dad's company, the house, everything." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't understand. Samuel, he made me feel loved, cared for. After years of loneliness, I thought I'd found happiness, but you..." She paused, her voice breaking. You destroyed it. You were jealous of Samuel, weren't you? You didn't want me to be happy. I stood frozen, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. Jealous? I had sacrificed everything, our home, my family's peace, sleepless nights, just to protect her, and she thought I was jealous? Mom, I said, my voice trembling. I did this for you, for Dad, for our family. I didn't want you to be hurt anymore. Samuel doesn't love you. He only wants your money. But she just looked at me, her eyes filled with pain and distance. You're grown, Ernest, she said, her voice cold. You have your own family, your own life. And me. I just wanted to live in peace with the love I thought I had. But you took that away. She stood, walked to her bedroom, and closed the door, leaving me alone in the vast living room once filled with my parents' laughter. I left my mother's house, my heart heavier than ever. I had defeated Samuel, but the cost was a rift with my mother, the woman I loved more than anything. On the drive back, I called Aunt Clara, hoping she could help my mother understand. Give her time, Ernest, she said gently. She's in shock. But she'll come around one day. I wanted to believe her, but deep down I feared that day might never come. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, my life settled into a strange state, part relief, part torment. Samuel was detained, awaiting trial for fraud and misappropriation of assets. His case became a focal point in Phoenix, drawing the attention of local media. Other victims of Samuel, emboldened by my story, began to come forward with their accusations. Evelyn and Linda, the two witnesses I had found, provided powerful testimonies that strengthened the case against him. Each day, new articles appeared exposing the dark past of Samuel Grayson, a professional con artist who had preyed on the trust of numerous women to steal their wealth. But for me, this victory brought no complete joy. My mother still refused to speak to me. I called, texted, even visited, but she always found ways to avoid me. Aunt Clara told me that Mom spent most of her time in her room clutching the wedding photo, as if trying to hold on to a piece of the past she had lost. She needs time, Ernest, Clara repeated. But each time I heard those words, the pain in my heart only deepened. Anna and I decided not to return to the motel. With Betty's help, I rented a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix. Not as grand as our old home, but cozy enough for Lily and Max to call it home. Anna turned it into a warm haven, hanging family photos, placing my books on shelves, and doing everything to help the kids forget the chaotic months. But each night after the children were asleep, I sat alone in the small living room, staring into space, thinking about my mother and her words. You destroyed my happiness. Those words were like a thorn lodged deep in my heart, impossible to remove. I returned to my writing, though my mind often wandered. My new novel, a story of loyalty and betrayal, progressed slowly. Each word I wrote felt like a reflection of my own life. Anna noticed my silence, and one evening she sat beside me, taking my hand. Ernest, you did the right thing, she said, her voice firm. You protected your mother even if she doesn't see it yet. Don't blame yourself. I nodded, but deep down I couldn't stop questioning whether I was truly right. I had saved my mother from Samuel, preserved my father's legacy, but the cost was a rift with the most important woman in my life. I wrote dozens of letters to her, but sent none. I wanted to tell her I loved her, that I never meant to hurt her, but I feared those words would only push her further away. One afternoon, as I sat in my study looking at a photo of my father with me and Betty as children, the phone rang. It was Aunt Clara. Ernest, your mother wants to see you, she said softly. My heart raced, a flicker of hope igniting. What did she say? I asked, my voice trembling. Clara sighed. She didn't say much, but she wants you to come. Go to her, Ernest, but don't expect too much. I drove to the mansion, my emotions in turmoil. My mother was sitting in the garden beside the rose bushes she and my father once tended. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes no longer held that lost expression. Ernest, She called when she saw me, her voice gentle but no longer cold. I sat beside her, waiting. "I was wrong," she said, her eyes fixed on the roses. "I trusted Samuel, thought he was everything I needed. But you were right. I'm sorry." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I held them back, taking her hand. "Mom, I just wanted to protect you," I said, my voice breaking. She nodded, squeezing my hand tightly. "I know. But I need time, Ernest. I've lost so much." I nodded, understanding that this wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a start. I returned home, my heart lighter, though still heavy with lingering guilt. Our new house gradually became a true home, filled with Lily and Max's laughter each day. I continued writing, each page a step toward healing. Samuel was convicted, paying the price for his crimes, but I knew the wounds in our family would take time to heal. One evening I sat in my study looking at my father's photo on the desk. He was smiling as if watching over me. I whispered, "Dad, I protected your legacy. I hope you're at peace." Outside, the stars in the Phoenix sky twinkled, a reminder that despite the pain, our family still had a chance to mend. In the months that followed, I often reflected on the journey my mother and I had been through, a journey of hurt, doubt, and profound lessons etched into my heart. Looking back, I realized our story wasn't just about exposing a con artist like Samuel. It was about how we face the truth, trust, and the most sacred relationships in our lives. I want to send a message to anyone who has found themselves in my mother's position, those who crave love and comfort so deeply that they can be blinded by sweet words. Listen to your heart, but don't forget to use your reason to protect what's precious. Loneliness can make us vulnerable, but don't let it become a door for predators to walk through. For me, the greatest lesson was about patience and faith in family. Even though my mother turned away from me, even though her words hurt, I never gave up hope that one day she would understand. And in the end, she did, even if it was just a small step toward healing. My advice, if you're still listening, is to cherish your loved ones, even when they make mistakes. Fight for them, but also give them time to heal. Families aren't always perfect, but it's those cracks that give meaning to our bonds. I lost my home, lost months of peace, but I kept my mother, my children, and the belief that justice will always find its way. Each night as I look up at the starry sky, I remind myself that even when darkness envelops us, the light is always there, waiting to be found. And I hope that someone out there facing their own challenges will find that light in their own heart and in the people they love.